Welcome to This is Henderson, the official podcast of the Henderson Tourist Commission, where we break down all things Henderson happenings, history, and hotspots. This is Abby Dixon.
And this is Ellie Keelan.
And this is Henderson. So today is a very special episode of our This is Henderson podcast. So we are actually on site for the first time recording an episode.
Yeah.
So we're here at Audubon State Park in the Audubon Museum, and we have a really special guest today.
Ta-da!
We have Connor Humphrey.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And we're so happy to have you on.
Yeah, we're excited to be doing
Connor's
this.
really cool.
Yeah.
We like Connor.
Knows a lot about this stuff. So, Connor, will you tell us a little bit about yourself just as we get started?
Absolutely. So, as Abby said, my name is Connor Humphrey. I'm the museum curator here at John James Audubon State Park. I have been here for just over a year now. Originally, I'm from Salem, Indiana, which is about 2 hours away from here, but I've lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and Wilmington, North Carolina, before finally ending up here.
Okay. And you actually moved to this area for the job.
That's correct, yes. Back in November of 2023, I got the job,
Yeah.
and then I was here beginning in January 2024.
What drew you to the job? Like when you saw the posting, what made you think, you know what, I'm going to go for that one?
Yeah, so I've always had a passion for curation and collections management, so I knew this was the type of job I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But then being at a state park where I can so easily get outdoors too. I grew up at a camp actually, and so I love being outdoors.
Yeah.
I love doing the hiking and kayaking and all that good stuff. And so the possibility to be able to be here was great for that. My previous job, where I was the curator and collections manager, it was right in the middle of downtown Wilmington, North Carolina, and we had beautiful gardens and everything, but it was right there in the city. And so I was excited to get to a place where I was a little bit out of the city.
Nice.
That's cool. Did you know a lot about Audubon and his history before you started the job, or did you kind of jump in and was like, I gotta learn this stuff?
Yeah, I gotta learn. Truth be told, I really didn't know a whole lot. I knew that he had painted birds. I knew there was a big book associated with him. Of course, the Audubon Society, right? But really, that was about the extent of my knowledge. So I really had to do a lot of research coming into the interview. And then they asked me how much I knew, and I probably went on for like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
As I often do. Yeah. And so, but then ever since then, it's just obviously day by day, building and building and building.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so on that topic of like coming in for the interview, tell me what your impression was whenever you pull into Audubon State Park and you kind of drive through this tunnel of trees. It was November.
Yeah.
So it was probably really beautiful.
Yes, it was ridiculously beautiful.
Yeah.
And it
They
was
picked a good
crazy.
time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was funny because I had never been to this park before.
Yeah.
And so I drove in, and you have all these beautiful leaves, and they're like swirling around your car as you drive through.
Yeah.
And I actually came early enough that I could hike,
Nice.
then change into my interview clothes, and then went to the interview.
You really proved yourself too.
Yeah.
I just spent a long time here.
At the time, I was really nervous that might reflect poorly on me. I think it might have helped.
For sure.
But yeah, so it was just such a great day, just being able to go actually through the park. And then after the interview, they brought me through the museum and the archive, and I got to really see what this was all about, and kind of knew from them that I really, really wanted to get this job.
Oh, that's awesome.
And be here.
Yeah. Well, we're so glad you're here.
Well, thank you.
So, okay, so we're in the museum right now. So this is really a unique state park. All state parks have like that nature element. Like you can really get outdoors, enjoy the trails, probably some water element. But whenever you pull into the museum parking lot, you see what appears to be a castle, which is the building where we're in right now.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the history of this building?
Absolutely. So if you've ever been here to the museum, or if you plan on coming soon, the first room that you walk into, the little lobby area where we have temporary exhibits, and then the actual museum galleries in here. This was all built in 1938 as a combined effort of the CCC and WPA. So whenever they get here, at first they were just going to have a state park, right? And they were, from the beginning, going to call it John James Audubon State Park. But then, of course, as many local Hendersonians know, as I should say, Susan Starling Tolles, who was a local librarian, she had already been in contact with some of the descendants of Audubon, and she was really learning more and more about this and collecting some materials, and she was like, well, why can't we have a museum there?
Yeah.
And they were like, we love it. So, they kind of let her run with that, and the museum built up from there. The bulk of our collection actually came as a loan from the descendants of John James Audubon.
That's cool.
Oh yeah, and so we have some incredible personal effects here at the museum because of that. And then back in 1990 to 92, we went through a few different changes. So one was actually building on what is now the gift shop and the nature center and the meeting room downstairs. All the rest of the building, observation room, that was added in 92 to kind of support the museum. But then also, it was around that time that the Friends of Audubon, which are their own separate 501c3 nonprofit group, they came in and they actually helped raise funds to purchase the collection from the Audubon descendants. That way it was no longer a loan, it was actually part of a permanent collection.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I know that there are other like Birds of America book collections, some even in Kentucky, and what makes Audubon Museum stand out compared to some of the other ones nearby?
So with the Birds of America specifically, a complete set is comprised of 4 volumes, 435 prints. So there are 100 prints, the first 3 volumes, and then the 4th volume has 135. And there are probably only about 120 complete sets in the world. And we have one here, obviously.
Wow, so
About 113 of those are at museums, libraries, archives, anything like that. And then there are only 7 that are in private hands. But of course, with that, you also get into the condition of the books, right? Those that have been left out, those that have a long history of changing over of owners, that they were in some better conditions. And we're very fortunate. We know exactly who bought it from Audubon, and we know who bought it from them and where it was donated and everything. And there's very few hand changes here. And so we have a really tremendous set here. And we know that it's even one of the earlier sets that was sold by subscription because it was from a gentleman in Leeds, England, which that was one of the first cities that Audubon went to whenever he was trying to get subscribers. So not only do we have an early set of Birds of America and everything, but we also have this great opportunity that it's only changed over a few times and it's in such great condition. And one thing that's fun too is here at the museum, we actually turn the pages on the books each month.
Yeah.
So each month that you come back, there's always something new to see. And it's always fun to see people that do come back over and over again just to see what the pages is.
Yeah, that's super cool. So backing up a little bit, can you tell us, we want folks to come and learn for themselves here at the museum, but maybe you could give us a preview of Audubon's significance to Henderson. Like, why do we have this museum here?
Yeah, absolutely. So John James Audubon himself was originally born in what is present day Haiti, right? So then he spent part of his childhood in France. He didn't end up actually coming to the U.S. until he was about 18 years old. Lived in Mill Grove, Pennsylvania for a while. Then after him and Lucy got married, they moved to Louisville, Kentucky, were there for a couple of years, and then finally make their way to Henderson in 1810. And this is actually where Audubon started to gain some success, but also had one of the greatest failures of his life too. So whenever I say success, this is both personal and professional.
Okay.
All 4 of his children were born in Kentucky.
Okay.
Only 2 of them would actually grow into adulthood. His 2 sons, his 2 daughters unfortunately passed away here. But whenever he's talking about his sons later on in his life, he actually refers to them as his Kentucky boys, right? And so there's that very sincere, he says that some of the happiest years of his life were actually right here in Henderson, Kentucky.
Me too.
Right? And so, he has this great personal connection, but then also professionally when he moves here, they have the mercantile store where they're selling all these goods, but then he starts buying out property from the Transylvania Company.
Okay.
So he's buying plots of land, he would put an alley in the middle and then sell them separately.
Okay.
And within a few years, he becomes about the 3rd wealthiest man in town. And so this is where he starts to get some success.
Well-to-do man.
Right? And then he builds the steam mill on the river. Unfortunately, that had many problems of its own, mechanically speaking. But then we have the panic. Panic was the first great economic depression in this country.
Okay.
And basically what had happened was after the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase, with all this territory and everything, France wanted their money right then, right there, and they wanted it in gold. And
Thanks, Thomas Jefferson.
Right. And so a lot of our money was just backed by paper, right? And it hit a lot of individuals, and Audubon did not get out of it well.
Yeah.
And so we like to say here at the museum that whenever he leaves Henderson, it's at that point that he makes the bold choice to actually start full-time painting and drawing these birds to create a publication such as the Birds of America. So in the museum, we do try to address both the good and the bad from Audubon's life. So whenever we're talking about the Henderson years, we also talk about how Audubon did own enslaved workers. And the reason why we talk about that is whenever you read these books and articles about Audubon, it says that he owned at least 9 enslaved workers. Well, where they get that number is actually from the Henderson County Deed Book, where it specifically lists these 7 enslaved workers in a certain bill of sale, and it has their names and ages. And as far as I know, any book that I've read or article, it just says 9 enslaved workers. It doesn't list their names and ages like the deed does. So that's one thing we've actually incorporated into our tours, not just talking about slavery, but naming names, telling what we know about them.
Yeah.
And that's
it's their story too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, if there is a museum that should be talking about it, it's really our museum because it happened here. And one of my biggest jobs as a curator is not just to answer questions that the public has, but to incorporate it in the tour. It's kind of a reflection of the world that we live in at the time.
Right.
And so that's one thing that I've added as well. And we have some other exhibits that are going to be coming up to address questions that guests regularly have. But that's something that we've been able to add in and talk about as well when we're talking about Audubon in Henderson.
Yeah, and you can learn about the entire story here at the museum, right?
That's right.
So tell us what an experience at the museum looks like. Like if you come in and you want a tour, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, the first thing you'll come into is we have a lobby where we put up temporary exhibits. We change it out once or twice a year, depending on what we've got going on. So right there, you already have free exhibits that you can look at no charge or anything. But then next you would make your way over to the gift shop, and that's, of course, the gift shop, but also kind of our admissions area. So that's where you're going to buy your tickets. On Wednesdays, by the way, Welcome Wednesdays, it's free admission.
Nice.
So
That's how we got in here.
Right, yeah, I definitely want to check it out on Wednesday.
Yeah.
But any other day, you would actually purchase the ticket at the gift shop. Every admission, whether it's free on Wednesdays or whether you're purchasing a ticket, now comes with an audio player. And that's something that's just happened within the past year.
So this is new.
Yeah, this is still new.
Okay,
We
cool.
released it back in November.
Okay.
So still very new, but people have been loving it as they come through. And, we've always allowed it to be a self-guided museum and everything like that to go at your own pace, right? But with this, you're really able to control how much information you want to get. And each stop, they're typically less than 2 minutes. So it's you're not sitting there for a really long time or anything like that. But if there are particular topics that you see that you want to know more about, you can do that. If you're kind of in a rush and you need to skip past it, you can do that as well. And so then we have 3 galleries here in the museum. So you go through the first half of Gallery 1, which is where we're at right now. And it goes through Audubon's story chronologically.
Okay.
So it starts kind of in Haiti, then it moves to France, and then Pennsylvania, Louisville, Henderson, and then follows him as he goes down to Louisiana and over to England and all these great places. And so as you go throughout the museum, you'll be able to see all kinds of things, whether it is prints from the Birds of America, of course that complete set, which we always have one book that's open and on display to the public that we turn pages. But like I said earlier, we have a lot of personal effects of Audubon as well. And so we have letters of his that are on display. We have items that were given to him by friends or family, some of them right here in Henderson. Right now we actually have a painting that he did while he was in Henderson. Up on display. So we have some really cool stuff, about Audubon and his family, but also particularly about here in Henderson.
I think one of my favorite things when I came here growing up was seeing Lucy's necklace made out of hair. It was so weird, but so interesting to me that I had to stop and look at it every time I was in the museum.
It's like
hair.
So there's a couple different pieces. Okay. So there's a necklace.
I think I'm looking at it right
now.
now.
I was going to say that one right over there. So that's actually supposedly made of Audubon's hair, and he gave it to Lucy. But you're good. Yeah.
We're in V-Day season.
Happy Valentine's
You were looking for inspiration.
I want everyone to know I don't want a necklace.
Well, and it's funny too because this is something that continued even into the 20th century. One thing I failed to mention earlier, I used to work at the Titanic Museum in Pigeon Forge.
Okay.
So Titanic was in 1912. We there at that museum actually had pieces of mustache that a guy had trimmed off and put in a letter and sent to his wife. And
Such
the whole
a
idea,
tradition.
it is.
Yeah.
But the whole idea was that you were sending a part of yourself right? And in a very literal sense here.
Her fingernails, but
Right? Yeah. Ooh, I don't know about that. But I will say there is a piece that is said to be Lucy's hair, which is a watch cord that she made for Audubon. And this is something that throughout their entire lives they did hair jewelry.
Yeah.
So the necklace and earrings you're looking at, those are actually when they were courting. The watch cord, right? The watch cord was actually whenever he was first kind of getting some success with the Birds of America. But then after he died, Lucy actually made mourning jewelry that had his hair and their son's hair and everything like that to remember them by. So that's a tradition, like I said, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's kind of weird to us today, but it's something that they kept up with throughout their entire lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you what the weirdest artifact is, but I think we covered that, maybe?
Oh, I don't know. We've got some stuff. So we've been a museum since 1938. We've been collecting since then.
Yeah.
And back in the early 20th century, not just here, but at museums across the country, it was kind of this idea that the more you take in, the more credible you are as a museum, whether it actually relates to your museum or not. Okay. So we have some stuff that may not pertain to us, but one thing, I actually did a Facebook post on this a couple months ago. We have what's called a mermaid's purse.
Okay.
So it's the shell that goes around the egg of either a shark or of a stingray. Ours is specifically of a ray. But yeah, and so it's a weird little specimen. It's a very strange thing whenever you're doing inventory and you come across
You just
it.
like, what's that have to do with anything?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to see pictures of that, go on our Facebook.
What's your
but yeah.
favorite artifact?
That's a hard one. We have some really interesting, there's a pendant that has been on loan to us by one of Audubon's descendants, and it's a golden amethyst cross that was given to Lucy by John James Audubon on Christmas Day, 1826. And we have that on display in the museum. It's a beautiful piece, and that's definitely got to be up there. We've got his wax seal that he would use on documents, and we even have some of those historic seals that are on letters and everything.
Oh, that's neat.
And there's a neat little story behind that too, but we have a couple of birds that we believe were taxidermized by Audubon himself. Not behind, actually behind the camera here. Yellow crown
I'll
nighthawk.
turn y'all around.
Yeah. But
We got the big man himself back here.
that's true. Yeah, I don't know if you can see, I'm kind of in the way.
It's looking a little jaundiced these days.
Right. I mean, obviously the Birds of America set's got to be up there. I mean, there was another ornithologist Audubon met when he was in Louisville, who is known as the father of American ornithology, which was Alexander Wilson. One thing that's really cool is we have Audubon's copies of Wilson's publication. And so as you come through the museum, you'll see a couple of those books. In one of them, we have the pileated woodpecker next to the ivory-billed woodpecker, which is now believed to be extinct.
Yeah.
But what's really cool about that is you actually see notations and drawings where Audubon went over it.
Wow.
And he said, oh, this beak needs to be a little bit longer, these tail feathers need to
So
be
he was
spread
still
out.
the father of ornithology.
Kind of a frenemy, sounds
Yeah.
like.
Oh, yeah.
Critical.
Oh, yeah. They had a pretty rough relationship. But yeah, and so we have stuff like that too. It's really, you get to see that in person and see what he was thinking as he was creating some of these things.
So it really brings his story and his history to life.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, and there's other things. So there are some things that speak to him as a person. There are other things that speak to him as an artist specifically. So another one of our staff's favorite across the board is this study of a hummingbird. And what it is it's a sheet of paper that's probably about this big. And right in the corner is a little hummingbird. Now, Audubon was always trying to draw these birds to scale. And it's said that if you go and measure the eyeball on one of these birds in the prints, and then measure the eyeball of the bird in real life, they'll line up almost exactly, right? I mean, it was pretty close, pretty accurate. And so with that, the hummingbird is teeny tiny. He had to work under a magnifying glass, and he, used paints, but he also used graphite, and he used all this different stuff to try to make it appear as realistic as possible, and to be the actual size that it was.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's really neat.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff. But, yeah.
Okay, so are you the one that turns the page once
Yes,
a month?
that's me.
Okay.
So you get to touch the book.
Yes, that's correct.
It's
I
pretty
get to
cool.
take it out of the case. It's a whole process, but basically I take it out of the case, turn the page, and then I photograph every aspect of it. That's both for our condition reports, for our museum, that way we know how it is. We also can use that in social media, right, stuff like that. But mainly just so that we have a good catalog of what's actually in our book.
Do you get nervous?
Yes.
Got it.
Let me tell you, I have worked with artifacts from early Bronze Age to Titanic to
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
And no matter what it is, whenever I'm actually there and I'm kind of like really up close with these
Yeah.
things, I still get a little nervous. And,
Yeah, I would
you know,
too.
it's just, it's such an amazing part of history too. It really, in that moment, you're really looking at this and you're like, man, imagine the people that first saw this.
Yeah.
You know, and they're in England and they haven't even seen a lot of these birds, you know, and they're flipping through these pages with their family to look at it. It's a really surreal kind of experience.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, so as you're flipping through the pages, and you've been here a year, so I mean, you haven't flipped through all of them yet.
That's
right?
correct,
Okay,
yeah.
what is your favorite so far?
Oh, this is so hard.
Because you get to see this like
yeah.
up close.
Yep. So of course, we have the book, and we have so many loose leaf prints as well. Over time, you know, some people didn't finish their subscription, so there were loose leaf prints. But the majority of them, a lot of times, people would cut them out of the pages and frame them, right?
Yeah.
Because they are artwork in and of their own
Right.
sense, each page. And so we have a lot of individual prints as well. Oh man, I have so many favorites. The American Magpie is a beautiful print.
Okay.
One of my actual favorite bird to see at the park is a belted kingfisher.
Okay.
And the belted kingfisher is a really interesting print where you have mountains in the background, river, and you have 3 different kingfishers all doing something different in a different pose, so you
Yeah.
can really view them all. Oh man, there's so many. I'll stick with those 2 for now. But there's a lot of really good ones, and you know, Audubon was kind of experimenting with some birds. So when he actually printed out the ruby-throated hummingbird for the Birds of America, he had them mix in gill pigment. And the whole idea was that it might create an iridescence like you really see with a hummingbird.
Yeah.
And so sometimes he was performing these experiments and you got to see, or he might have a specific story with this bird that he saw. And so, there's a lot of great ones.
Very cool.
So,
Very cool. What else would you add to folks who are maybe on the fence about planning a trip to come visit the museum? Give them your elevator pitch.
there we go.
Elevator pitch.
There we go, yeah. So one thing, if you live in the area, you've got to come here. We're not just talking about Audubon's history, we're talking about Henderson's history as well. And, you know, I always tell people that with Audubon, the thing that we really take away from him now is that he was in this place and he looked around at the nature that's right here in Henderson, and he was so inspired by it. He really saw the beauty in it.
Yeah.
And it's really what put him on fire to pursue this kind of work. And so not only do I always encourage people to come out here and see the museum and see these beautiful works of art and everything and learn more about Audubon's story and people that helped to collaborate with that, but also get on the trails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we'll have kids sometimes that they come here and they do a museum tour with me and they do a trail with our naturalists, you know, and go hiking and everything. And sometimes they'll see the birds that they see in here.
Right.
And they get so excited,
That's
you know.
so cool.
And you know, it really makes you put into perspective the things that he was doing when there's no photography.
Right.
Right? I mean, he had to catch these birds or at times shoot and kill them and pin them up in specific
Right.
areas. And it's like really to capture that detail.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like there's so much to learn about Audubon and his story. There's so much to learn about nature just in general. And there's so much to learn about Henderson here.
Yeah.
So if you're in the area, you definitely have to check it out. If you love birds, you've got to come here as well. This is just kind of a must for birders.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's so much I could talk about. But I'll leave it at that. The elevator has arrived at the level.
Yeah,
So.
there you go. You know, and I love what you said about like Audubon was so inspired by the nature that was around him. And I feel like that's something that, you know, as Hendersonians and as folks who come and visit Henderson as a destination, we can all leave inspired whenever we take the time to just enjoy the beautiful nature that surrounds us. So there's a lesson to be learned there. And
Absolutely.
If you haven't learned it for yourself, you can hit the trails and be inspired.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I feel like this is a good
Yeah.
taste of what you can experience here at the museum. There's a lot more to do at the park than just the museum, so we'll have to come back and explore kind of some of those other things that we can do too. But for now, hit up Audubon Museum. You will not regret it.
Right.
You'll learn
You'll see
something
a
new.
necklace made out of hair. I'm still thinking about it. I can't get over
See if
it.
you're- And earrings too.
And earrings.
Yeah,
Yeah. Audubon's hair is here.
that's
Very
right.
old hair.
Yeah, that's true. Come see it for yourself.
So until next time, this is Henderson.